5th Selectmen's meeting live from Town Hall. But before we start, I'd like Steve to lead us on the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Steve. So, Davis, you can watch us tonight or this evening on Comcast Channel 22, Verizon Channel 41, or online at Danvers, Mass. That's danversma.gov/remote meetings. There are options tonight for public comment, and we will have public comment if there's any towards the end of the agenda, not in the beginning. And you can do it by email, publiccomments@danversma.gov, or by phone, 978-777-0001, extension 2. And the assistant town manager will be there to take your questions. But email is preferred. Please include your name and address. So, as a preliminary matter, this is Dan Bennett, Chair of the Board of Selectmen. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Bill Clark?
Here.
Diane Langley?
Here.
David Mills?
Present.
Gardner Trask?
Present.
And staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Steve Bartha?
Here.
Joe Collins?
Present.
Jim Breaker?
Present.
Nope, present. Okay, Rodney Conley?
Present.
Kathy Ellsworth?
Here.
Okay, Colby Cousins?
Here.
Bill Clark, I got Bill. And Mark Hollow. Is that everybody?
Here.
Did I miss anybody? Thank you. So good afternoon. This open meeting of the Danvers Board of Selectmen is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order, March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of the public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by the law. For this meeting, the Board of Selectmen is convening remotely via the WebEx app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you, and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials have been provided to members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. The meeting business ground rules. Before we turn to the second item on the agenda, we must permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. The chair will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude the remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage with other members, please go through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. So 2 additional comments for this meeting. There's a lot of questions that I'm sure people have about the state of emergency, what's essential, what isn't essential. Please direct those questions to our town website, and somebody will respond to you. Under the state of emergency, the Board of Selectmen is not really able to explain to you what the governor's directives and guidance is. It's best that you get that from the folks that have those answers. Assistant Town Manager, Director of Board of Health, those are the proper places to ask those questions. Board members, first item of business is we need to, with your willingness, to add an additional item to agenda as follows. To accept a gift from Steve Bartlett, owner of Vantage Clean, to clean the police cruisers. He's offered to clean these on his own, and I'd like a motion to allow adding that to the agenda item 3B.
Mrs. Gardner, so moved.
Second.
Who second?
Second.
Thank you. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Simple enough. Well, we'll move now to the agenda. Item 2 is the approval of the minutes for March 10th, 2020. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. Mills.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Trask, second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Opposed? None. Thank you. Approval of the minutes of March 30th, 2020.
So
Motion.
moved, Trask.
Mills. Second.
Thank you. Motion and trust. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Thank you. Okay. We'll go to item number 3. The board will vote to accept a gift from Walmart to the Danvers Fire Department according to Mass General Laws, Chapter 44, Section 53A. In your package, you've got a notice that Walmart donated $1,000 to the fire department. And I'd like a motion to accept that gift and send an appropriate letter.
Trask, so moved.
Thank you.
Mills. Second. Mills.
Bill, second. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Thank you. And the next item is the item we added, 3B. And I'll read to you a little letter that the police chief sent over. I have been contacted by Steve Barrett, the owner of a Vantage Clean company. He is an Alden Street resident, and his company is offering to professionally clean and sanitize our cruisers. The company is a certified COVID-19 cleaner, and he's offering this service as a give back to the community. Any questions? Gardner, Austin?
No questions, thank you.
Welcome. David, questions?
No questions. Thank you.
Bill, questions?
No questions, thank you.
Diane?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Steve. We have a motion to accept and send the appropriate letter.
So moved, Trask.
Clark, second.
Diane?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Thank you. Item 4, the board is in receipt of an application by Christopher Segas, 80 Foster Street, Suite 101, Peabody, for reappointment as civil constable in the town of Danvers. We all received a letter from, you received a copy of a letter from Christopher and recommendations from our police chief as well as some other folks in the communities. Are there any questions?
No, thank you.
Okay, no question. Mr. Town Manager, anything you want to add?
Nope, all the paperwork's in order, and the applicant has letters of recommendation from both the Danvers Police Chief and the PV Chief of Police.
Very good, thank you. Is there a motion?
Motion by Mills to approve the appointment.
Thank you, second.
Trask,
Likewise.
Thank you, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None, thank you. Item 5, the board is in receipt of an application by Danvers High School teacher Ron Gabel for a first-time banner hanging over Maple Street from June 3 to June 15, July 27 to August 3, and High Streets, May 27 to June 15, and July 27 to August 3rd, in celebration of the Danvers High School class of 2020. Any questions? Hearing none, will we have a motion?
Motion to approve, Clark.
Thank you. Second?
Second Langley.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None, thank you. The board will hear an update from the Public Health Director and the Town Manager on the town's response to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to recognize Mark Carleo to start, and I can add some comment after he provides the board an update. I would note quickly, although Mark's been an employee of the town for 18 years, his first official day as our Director of Public Health was on March 16th. I'm not sure that there was ever worse timing in terms of a first day than to begin in the midst of a global health pandemic. But Mark has done a tremendous job stepping into Peter Mirandi's shoes. And he's been a trusted resource and a valuable asset to the town over the past, I guess, 8 weeks now, but who's counting? And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mark and let him update the board and anybody watching at home in terms of what he's been focused on, he and his board and his nurses.
Welcome, Mark, and thank you for joining us tonight. We look forward to your update.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So Mark Carleo, I'm the Public Health Director for the town. I wanted to start off with a brief history or order of the events as they had unfolded. It kind of shows how we've escalated everything as the spread of the disease continued. It starts off with, it was about March 13th where we had decided to close town hall and the public buildings. And then following that, on the 18th of March, the town manager issued a declaration of an emergency. So once that was declared, pursuant to that, we issued numerous orders after that. The first on March 19th, which also happened to be the same day we received the report of our first positive case, we issued an order closing a slew of non-essential personal service businesses, things like hair salons, the reason why all of us need a haircut at this point, tattoo establishments, the real close contact kind of places, nail salons. Following that, on the 20th, we realized we needed some additional help potentially for enforcing these orders as we go forward. So I had requested that we have the Danvers police officers appointed by the town manager as agents of the Board of Health so that they're able to operate under our statutory authority. On the 23rd of March, we issued guidance to essential retailers after the governor had put out an extensive list of essential businesses. And the guidance offered a lot of recommendations on maintaining social distancing, protecting their employees, and protecting the public. We had let them know at that time that if we see substantial variation from this guidance document, it may no longer be guidance and it may become a requirement. And really, for the most part, we've had a lot of success in just putting information out there and businesses picking up on that and doing what's best for the public and people's families and their employees. There were a few establishments that were going a little overboard with allowing a certain number of people into their buildings. So we issued on April 2nd a restriction of no more than 50 people within an essential business at a time. This one caught a lot of attention to the point where on April 9th, we had to amend the order to remove grocery stores from it as the governor had issued his own order, which stops local boards of health from limiting grocery store attendees. However, several of the grocery stores in town actually contacted me and expressed that they had actually appreciated that limit and have instituted limits of their own. And I believe that that's made a tremendous difference in the number of cases that we'll see in this region. Following up on that, on April 6th, we issued a moratorium on evictions and open houses. And then lastly, on the 17th, we issued a requirement for face coverings in essential businesses. This becomes law statewide as of, I believe, tomorrow. So along with all of the orders and escalating how we were responding to things, we also had realized pretty quickly that we had to start scaling up our staff. So we have our sole public health nurse, Judith Ryan, who I hope you all know. If you haven't, stop by the senior center when things so-called get back to normal. She'd be happy to meet you. So she's the nurse who works for the Board of Health, and she was working solo doing what's now become part of the American lexicon, contact tracing. And along with that, she completes questionnaires about clinical matters, demographics, and this is all a part of the state reporting. She quickly was going to reach a point where we could see it was going to get overwhelming as the cases continue to rise. So around March 25th, we had reached out to Lisa Dana and Keith Taverno over at the school department, and we're tremendously grateful that they allowed us to work with their school nurses who had volunteered to come and work for us, to help Judith out, to help us, the whole community, with all of this contact tracing and the clinical questioning. I can't express how incredibly grateful we are to those school nurses. It's made a humongous difference. It really has. And then on top of that, we now have, I'm sure a lot of you have probably heard by now about this collaborative that the Commonwealth has with Partners in Health. And this is a tracing collaborative. And that itself has been slowly scaling up. We're at the point now where they will automatically be collecting cases that are being reported to us and doing the follow-ups for us. So again, helping to kind of relieve that burden. But improving that contact tracing rate, how quickly we can get to those and how quickly we can get people quarantined, that's how we're going to start getting ahead of the curve, get that rate of transmission much, much lower and enable us to start reopening. Otherwise, we're fielding complaints, of course. They're pretty steady coming into the office. A lot of them, I have to say, come from misunderstandings of essentially the difference between what are guidance, what's an order, what's law, what's not. For example, wearing masks just while out in public walking down the street. A lot of people think that this is a requirement. It's recommended. The evidence, though, in terms of people's behavior shows that we're actually doing tremendously well. The average number of contacts for an index case at this point is 2, and we were expecting something closer to 10. So the social distancing that we're practicing, these measures that were put into place, people are following them closely. It's never going to be 100% compliant. It's just not realistic, but we're doing really fantastic. And I'm proud of Danvers for the amount of effort that everybody has been putting into this. On top of that, we keep frequent contact with our larger essential establishments, mostly just to relay the complaints that we're getting, help them adjust their policies and keep their management. One of course, the most key things that we've been doing right from the get-go, the most important thing has been communication to the public. In the beginning, press releases were very common. We now have a COVID-specific page at danversma.gov, and our social media has expanded quite a bit. I'd have to pause here and say a huge, huge thanks to Jen Breaker, our assistant town manager and communications director. What she's been putting on social media has been fantastic. It's been getting a lot of attention to the point where I even got some positive comments from a colleague in part of the state that's almost 2 hours away. Otherwise, mass.gov, the Commonwealth has actually done pretty well in terms of maintaining their site, and I'm generally referring people there or referring to it myself. And then probably my favorite part of communicating with the public was the live Q&A that me and our nurse, Judith, and the town manager did. Live on YouTube, answering some public questions. So I figured we'd talk about where we are now. As of last Wednesday, the Commonwealth reported that Danvers has seen so far 467 cases reported. When I start digging through those numbers, we find that 351 of those cases, or about 75%, are occurring in our long-term care facilities in town. This is right in line with the state data statewide in terms of who this disease is affecting at the most serious rate, and that's the 80-plus residents. So our nurses are continuing to follow up on all of the contacts. Again, cannot thank what they're doing is just unbelievable. We're listening to the public. We're responding to their inquiries, their concerns, their complaints. And last I had kind of looked, I try not to check in on exactly where we're at too often. Sometimes it's depressing. Sometimes it helps you be optimistic. But, you know, we certainly have been in that surge or perhaps even in that plateau for a period now. I'm feeling optimistic, like there's some light at the end of the tunnel. I think we are going to see, you know, a bit of a new normal, but we're going to start climbing out of this thing pretty soon. There's plenty more to do, though. We're going to continue with the contact tracing and all of the follow-ups. Those are absolutely going to continue. Isolation and quarantine orders are going to continue to be issued. And, of course, we're going to continue to rely on the public's assistance. Like I said before, Danvers has been doing absolutely fantastic in terms of maintaining their distancing and staying home, exactly what we've been asking. So, again, I guess I would sort of just close my remarks by just, you know, again, two things. Answer the phone. If you're getting a phone call from a strange number, it could be somebody doing the contact tracing. Our social media page has the area codes where you can expect those calls from. They may also call from local numbers, and those would be our own school nurses and our public health nurses. And otherwise, you know, stay in contact with others, just not physically in contact with others. Just keep your distance, stay at home as much as you can, and then we'll hope to see some reopening guidance and planning starting up soon.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate the update. Board members, do you have any questions for Mark, Bill?
Hold on a second, Dan. I should have warned, I went ahead, Jen received an
Muted
email.
everybody.
I muted everybody. We were getting some feedback from the community that there was a lot of static on the call. So I secretly muted everybody. Dan, you figured out that I did it and you unmuted yourself. So I tip my cap to you for solving that one. If you could give me just a minute, I'd like to fill in or add a little bit to some of the things that, I mean, I think Mark and I and even Jen would be happy to take questions. So a couple of different service areas I'd just like to give a quick update on. One is veteran services. In addition to retiring his public health role, Peter Morandi also retired his veteran service officer role. And Kelly Reyes Teixeira also started on March 16th under what are unusual circumstances. And she has done a very good job, all things considered, because she hasn't had the ability to be, you know, present in the building with the files and getting her feet wet. But she has been in constant communication with our veterans. She's ensured that the Chapter 115 benefit payments have gone out smoothly the last 2 months. She's been coordinating the delivery of boxes of food to veterans. We have some of our veterans participating in our school lunch program, which I'll comment on in a few minutes. And really, it's been the weekly calls to the veterans to just check in and see how they're doing. And so I wanted to acknowledge that. She's been working closely with the Veterans Council. Much to everybody's disappointment, the Memorial Day parade itself has been canceled. But the council and Kelly are working closely with DCAT to come up with what I think will be a pretty neat program that they're going to put together to honor the day in a way that I think makes sense given where we are in the world right now, with the hope that we'll be back bigger and better than ever next year. Senior and social services, a couple of quick updates. Pam Parkinson and her staff have been reaching out to seniors. They've made more than 400 wellness calls to date to our seniors to check in on them and see how they're doing. They have distributed more than 100 homemade masks to seniors who reached out and said that they needed one. They've partnered, Pam and her staff have partnered with DCAT to put on some Zumba, some remote Zumba and chair toning classes for the seniors who can't be in the center itself getting programming. And really just kind of, on the check-ins, figuring out what they need and seeing how we can help them. Just a brief update on police. I think it's not a big surprise that calls across the board are down significantly right now, but we're seeing a higher percentage of mental health calls as a percent of our total calls. And I think that's not unsurprising because people are under a lot of stress right now. The majority of our officers are trained in crisis intervention, and we have a mental health nurse who works with the department daily. So we make sure to connect people with the services that they need or are eligible for. But that is, that's a trend that, Chief Ambrose and his team are monitoring. But across the board, we're seeing shoplifting is down, but the theft of Amazon packages off the porches are up. I guess that sort of also makes sense given where we are right now. I want to acknowledge the work that the community council is doing. So the food pantry, town staff has been supplementing them for the past 8 weeks to help make sure that their service remains, continuous. They've seen, David, I'm pausing to mute you because I think I'm getting some echo here again. Okay. So the food pantry has seen their total membership increase by close to 23% this year, and more than half of those new customers have come on board since March 12th. They've been delivering food as well. We're still doing pickup at the pantry, but we're also making a lot of home deliveries right now for some of our clients at the food pantry who may not be comfortable, coming to the pantry itself. And then I wanted to mention too the school lunch program that we launched. Really, Keith Taverna, and in particular, I'd like to acknowledge Tom Powers and his food services staff at the high school. But right when all of this started, they identified the need to continue providing lunches, to any students who needed them. And almost immediately, we decided to make that available to any Danvers resident that felt like they needed to have a lunch delivered for whatever the reason. And we've been delivering about 1,000 lunches a week under that program. It's been, hundreds of families are participating, and it's been really well received. And the feedback that the schools and that the food services crew are getting, it's really making a difference. We are expecting, this is a revolving account program, so it's always been self-sustaining. As you can imagine, right now we're spending, but we're not generating revenue there. So we're anticipating needing to do a budget transfer at town meeting so that the food services program can hit the ground running in the fall. And that may be close to $50,000. But at this point, the direction to the school department has been to continue to run that program. And we would be glad to bring that to town meeting later this spring when we come back together. And then just really briefly, the last thing I wanted to mention is inspectional services, and that includes Board of Health. So the world has changed in a lot of ways, but we still have our inspectors are out safely conducting those inspections that they can. We've paused most applications coming in for non-emergency or non-life safety inspections, but Rich Maloney and his inspectors are still out doing plumbing and electrical inspections where necessary, following safety protocols. Mark Carleo and his inspectors are doing emergency inspections for life. I guess emergency is the best way to put that. A lot of the routine inspections are paused right now, and then a lot of the follow-up that they're doing has to do with enforcement of the current regulations that are on the books as a result of the COVID crisis. And I could go on and on and on, and I think I'll stop there for questions. But the public works crews are out. They're working an AB schedule, practicing safe social distancing, doing what they can. We're about to take advantage of the fact that the school buildings are closed. It's going to give our buildings crews an opportunity to get in a little bit early this year and start doing some of the summer program that they normally have to wait until the end of June for. So that will be an opportunity to get a little bit ahead. And Smith School continues to move forward. So we've had a few minor hiccups on that project related to coordinating with contractors early on in the crisis, but the project itself remains on track. And that's a testament to PMA as well as WT Rich, who are overseeing and building the school itself. So we'd be happy to take any questions the board has related to any of the material we just discussed.
Thank you, Steve. Bill, we'll start with you if you have questions. Can you unmute yourself, Bill?
There he goes.
Okay,
Bill,
thank you. I'm just very impressed with what's been going on. The water department and the public works department up on Hobart Street with their construction and their ability to try to keep access to all of us. And the contractor that we had is working on that job is just doing a phenomenal job. They're very efficient. They do more in about 3 hours than most places do all day long. But they've come a long ways. They've got all the temporary services are connected, I guess now, and they were starting to work up at the Highland School today, I guess, because the street was shut off. But it's been very interesting to watch what's happened as they try to repair that or replace that 50-year-old plus water main that has been very deficient. And Steve, thank you for providing that as one of our main tasks in that water improvement program, because it was certainly needed with all the water breaks we had there.
Thank you, Bill. Diane?
Thank you, Mark, for that update. I've been really needing to hear what was going on. I have a couple of things. I'm still, of course, working and dealing with small businesses, and for the most part, they're grateful to you, and I think they've been amazingly reasonable. They're professionals, and they're acting like professionals. So thank you to all the small businesses for how you have conducted yourselves. It's fantastic to see. The mental health, of course, I'm hearing this from families that they do some people that are not dealing well with this. So thank you to the police and to the nurses who are trying to get them to where they need to be, because they are telling us that this is going to be the next problem in the COVID, and so thank you for addressing that. Of course, I still, know that the domestic and child abuse is also another thing we have to watch in this, and we're fortunate to have probably one of the best educated police forces in domestic abuse. So I'm feeling very fortunate there also. I've heard that from people that their parents are actually getting so many calls, which is great to hear, from different organizations in the senior center, and it's been a real help to these seniors. I know in my clients, my seniors, some of them are calling me 4 or 5 times because they're just looking for somebody to talk to. So having them get phone calls is really helps their mental health. And my last thing is, yes, I'm that person on the rail trail Sunday that kept asking you that you're probably going to have to wear a mask starting Wednesday. There is no 6 feet. Still walking 3 across, no masks, approaching us. So there is not 6 feet. And when I read the governor's order, it said indoors and out if you could not be 6 feet apart. Well, the rail trail is not 6 feet wide. So I do hope that we are telling people that, yes, the governor's order is on the rail trail. The masks really have to be worn while you're passing, but you get within 6 feet of somebody. So I am hoping that we're going to say that. It's quite scary. And if everybody walks single file, we wouldn't have the problem, but they're 3 across approaching you. And there's only so far you can walk off the trail. So that is something I did notice. Other than that, I think the people of Danvers have been amazing. So, and thank you, Mark. You walked into this, and I think you've done a heck of a job, and I'm really happy you gave us this update. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you, Diane. David? Unmute David.
I can get him. Yep, there we go.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
It's okay.
Thank you, Dan. Mark, I should know this, but when you say on local social media page, what are you talking about, please? Is that Danvers Facebook page?
Faceagram, yeah. So we have at Town of Danvers on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
Don't go too fast.
Sure. So
So start again, please.
Sure. So we have our main 3 social media accounts. It's we use the same tag across all of them. So it's at Town of Danvers.
Is that the symbol, Mark, or the word?
The word. So
The word.
oh, you mean at? No, I'm sorry. It's the symbol.
Yeah.
Now, is that on Facebook or where is that? How do I go find that?
Yep. So you can use your search bar on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
Facebook or Instagram?
Yep. Or Twitter.
Okay, let me try it. And if I have a problem, I'll call Steve on his mobile.
You're welcome to email me too, and I'll just email you the links to it.
Yeah, oh, okay, I'll give it a try. I never knew about those. No wonder I don't so much. But otherwise, I just want to say, I am so affirmed by the competence of our town. Steve, you're doing a wonderful job. Mark, that was an excellent, for me, a very reassuring presentation. And thank you for, I have nothing else to add.
Thank you, David. Gardner. There is.
All right. I just want to say I can't speak more highly of the people who have chosen to work for the town of Danvers. Everybody's really stepped up and gone above and beyond. While we're in our homes, we don't see all of the efforts that people are bringing to their jobs, and I appreciate it. Things have been very smooth. I've heard nothing but positive feedback. When people have a question on social media and they're directed to the town hall person or the right department, often they come back and say how helpful it was and that they're glad they called. I'm wondering, a question for Mark is, when we post an advisory or we post I don't know if regulation is the right technical term, do we provide the stores or the businesses we affect with an official Danvers posting? I'm thinking that if we say like 50 people per store, or now it's whatever percentage of capacity, I think it would be good to give them something on letterhead that they can post right at the front door, so that they don't have to take the brunt of the backlash. We hope people are being socially responsible. We hope people understand, but sometimes there are people who don't or want to know the source of our advisory or our requirement. And I think it would be good to be able to give them something to post so that the manager of the store or the store worker can just point to it and say, here it is, black and white. Do we provide that?
Directly to the businesses, you mean? In some cases, yeah. Essentially, our largest ones where we have frequent contact with them, we send them by email. I can follow up with phone calls. Otherwise, this is why we keep pushing people towards our social media and our website. They're all being posted there to keep people up to date as we go.
Okay, so a business could, if they wanted to, go to our website, download those, and post them.
Yes, in fact, they should be. I've seen at a few stores exactly like you're talking about, where they post it right at the door, big red ink, city ordinance, unfortunately, instead of town ordinance, but
Right.
We'll settle for it.
Okay. Other than that, I think we are doing a fantastic job. I've seen people stepping up from town employees stepping up to answer questions on social media, which is evolving to be one of our primary communication points. So I appreciate it. And I have nothing but positive things to say about the way the town's been responding to this. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Gardner. Thank you, Steve and Mark. And we'll go to number 7. The board will hear an update from the town manager and finance director on the status of the revised fiscal 2021 budget, including hearing schedule and revenue forecast. Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have, Ronnie Conley, our Director of Administration and Finance, is on the call. We're going to keep the update tonight pretty high level because we are planning to have a budget hearing next week on the 14th. So I think the first thing I would acknowledge is that we have a calendar has been set between the chair of the Board of Selectmen and Finance Committee. So the Board of Selectmen will be starting a budget review on May 14th, which is next Thursday at 3 p.m. And we've scheduled a follow-up for 3 p.m. on Friday if necessary. Getting a lot of echo. I can hear every word I'm saying. Excuse me, it's hearing your own voice repeat what you're saying back to you is a very disorienting feeling. So the Finance Committee will be doing their budget review the week of May 20th. They'll be meeting on the 20th at 6 p.m. and they have the 21st at 6 p.m. scheduled for overflow if the hearing continues into a second day. Beyond that, we have the warrant tentatively scheduled for review by the Board of Selectmen on May 26th at 3 p.m. and the Finance Committee on May 28th at 6 p.m. After that, we have the local election scheduled for June 2nd. That's a revised election date, and Town Clerk Joe Collins will be giving an update on that a little later in the agenda. And at this point, we have our town meeting, our delayed town meeting date is set for June 15th. At this point, both, well, the time is set by charter, but the location is to be determined. There's a bill right now. I think it's been passed by one of the houses, one of the that would allow for remote town meetings. Our goal is to avoid that to the fullest extent possible. But our ability to conduct an in-person town meeting will depend in large part on where we are a couple weeks from now when the governor revisits the May 18th milestone that he set. A couple of notes on the process itself. It is different this year. Clearly, we had a budget prepared for the Board of Selectmen to be reviewed on March 14th when all this was starting. That budget is still on the website, but a lot of the assumptions in that budget had to go out the window when this crisis started to unfold. We will be posting all of the materials for the budget review onto the website before the hearings take place. We're going to do our best to get physical materials to town meeting members well in advance of town meeting. Historically, we've been able to provide a hard copy of the budget to town meeting members prior to the Finance Committee review, but because the public buildings are currently closed, and it's a pretty big effort to get those printed and collated. We don't have the staff on site. We will have those out prior to town meeting, but it is unlikely that those are going to be available in hard copy for every town meeting member prior to the review of the Finance Committee starting on the week of the 20th. But our website, www.danversma.gov, is where you will find all of the material, including the draft budget, which obviously, as I mentioned before, has changed considerably from where we were 8 weeks ago. So that's the schedule. What I'd like to do is talk just briefly about some of the goals we had set for ourselves to put forward in the fiscal 21 budget. Some of the challenges we were facing before any of this started, and then certainly we can talk about what's changed since March 10th when the governor issued his emergency declaration. So the fiscal 21 budget that we had been prepared to put together accomplished a couple of goals that we had set several years ago, one of which was to update the town's healthcare plan to generate some cost savings, which would allow us to strengthen our operating budget in a couple of key areas, including building into the operating budget an offset for the OPEB or retiree healthcare costs, which have historically been paid out of free cash, which, if you're relying on from year to year, is not a best practice. So by working with the employee groups over the past 2 years to change the healthcare plan, we had generated some cost avoidance that allowed us to redeploy some of those resources into retiree healthcare. That was one goal. Another goal that we had set was to try to start to build into the operating budget some capital budget. We historically spend free cash on our capital expenditures as well. So those are two goals that we had set before the crisis started, and we ran into a couple of budget surprises. One of which was the preliminary assessment from Essex Tech, which in its current draft form, that budget and the number of students they've accepted from Danvers would generate close to a $600,000 increase in our year-over-year assessment. We sent a letter to the Tech School Committee asking that they consider looking at an admissions policy moving forward that would offer more predictability and budget stability for member communities. That was a letter I presented to the North Shore Coalition, which is part of the Metro Area Planning Committee. That's a group of mayors and managers from the North Shore. There was broad support for having the conversation around that subject. I then had a chance to present the letter to the school committee via a remote platform just like this a couple weeks ago, and they received the letter and decided to form a subcommittee so that they could take this question up and come back. But in the short term, we're still facing a fairly significant increase in our fiscal 21 budget related to those admissions decisions from not this April that we just ended, but a year ago. And the second large budget driver that we didn't see coming in December was news from the school department that they had an unexpected spike in out-of-placement special ed students in the middle of fiscal 20. Those placements can cost as much as $250,000 per student, depending on the type of program that they're attending. So those we had 10 students mid-year either move into the district or received an IEP within the district, and it created a $1.6 million budget variance mid-year for the school department. So we've been working closely with them. We're going to be looking at a considerable budget transfer at this town meeting to close 20, and they're going to be relying pretty heavily on their circuit breaker funds in 21. But this is a new expense if it stays that we're going to have to work. We'll have to chase for a couple of budget cycles. So those two challenges were facing us prior to the public health crisis, and obviously since March 12th, much has changed. So if I could direct you briefly to the documents you received on Friday. The first document received was a revised fiscal year budget proposal dated May 1st. That really is more of a cover letter to the budget message, which is the second document received. That is the budget message that was prepared for the March budget, and it goes into great detail on some of the topics I just mentioned. And I think the cover letter does a good job of explaining what has changed from that original message. So what I'd like to do is talk briefly about what has changed since March. So I think the most concerning one for us right now in terms of size is what will happen with state aid. So the governor in January had proposed, as he has for the past 5 years, that municipal aid would increase in parallel to the state revenues increasing. So he was passing on, in good times, he was making sure that the revenue increases that the state experienced made their way down to the towns and cities. At the same time, the Student Opportunities Act was passed last year, which was going to result in a net increase in school spending. Not a considerable amount in Danvers, because most of the money was directed toward the low socioeconomic districts across the state, but it was several $100,000. It is based on a call this morning with someone from the Department of Revenue. It remains unlikely that we're going to have any clarity on that front until potentially after July 1st. But we have been in close communication with our state delegation. We've been looking at the recession to try to figure out, what do we think the worst case scenario is. So at this point, we're assuming a 15% reduction in local aid for towns, which is more than what was reduced, or pretty close to what was reduced in year 2 of the Great Recession, and a 5% reduction in Chapter 70. The reason the local aid is being dropped at a larger number than the school aid is because generally when the state is making reductions, they tend to try to hold the schools harmless to the extent that they can. And that nets out to a little over a 7% reduction in our state aid line. The other key area that we're going to be facing some considerable headwinds, not so much as we close out fiscal 20, but looking ahead to fiscal 21, is in some of our local receipts revenue lines, which are mentioned at the bottom of the first page of the cover letter. Hotel, motel, meals tax, motor vehicle excise, and permitting are the 4 categories that are most susceptible to economic, upturns and downturns. So we generally are conservative in our projections, which comes in handy right now because we are making reductions from last year's actuals and not from the budget number. So we're making pretty steep reductions in these lines, but budget to budget they're not as steep because our actuals last year were higher than what we budgeted. So the good news is we're positioned to absorb those better than a lot of communities. The bad news is that conservative revenue estimation on these accounts is what generally leads to our free cash certification at the end of the year. So the impact on the operating budget will be real and has resulted in the need to make some significant reductions. But the ripple effect is going to be that next year's free cash certification will be impacted by the loss of revenue in some of these accounts. very briefly on the spending side. So, all told, we are looking at around a $2 million loss in revenue. That is from where we thought we were in March. And the way that I've been describing that is that it's somewhere in between hopelessly optimistic and doomsday scenario. We think that these reductions are necessary based on what we know. And if things continue to worsen or there's a second spike this year, we'll be in a good position come fall to make other adjustments. So the $2 million in lost revenue we think is that is based on our experience in the 5 years during the Great Recession. It's based on the intel that we have from our state delegation and in our discussions with our municipal peers. But there's a real chance that the situation could continue to worsen. So we're prepared and looking ahead, and we'll get into that in great detail during the budget hearing next week. But that's the revenue picture. And then on the expenditure side, we had spoken earlier this year that one of the big budget items this year was implementing a split payroll conversion. That was about a $780,000 item that was coming at the request of our auditors. They have been asking us for a couple of years to do that. One of the first phone calls we made after the crisis emerged was to our auditors. They gave us permission to delay that conversion. They said if they were in our shoes, that's the first thing they would have done as well. So Rodney reached out immediately, got their blessing to do that. So we're able to delay that. It's something that we'll have to do later, but we can push that out. We also had to shift the OPEB contribution that we had put into the tax levy back into free cash. We'll be able to make that contribution this spring. Certainly we'll have some concern looking ahead to next year. That is one of the areas that is critical for us in terms of our bond rating, that we have set a funding schedule for ourselves and stick with it. So the bad news is we had to undo the gains we made in the operating budget. The good news is we still had a free cash certification that allowed us to adopt that fallback strategy. Additionally, we worked with the schools to cut about $250,000 in operating expenses out of their budget. We've been working diligently with all of our employee groups. We have tentative agreements, need to be ratified still, but tentative agreements in place with most of our employee groups to put in place 1-year contracts. We were about to start renegotiating all of our 3-year agreements. There's enough risk on both sides right now that we've all agreed that 1-year agreements is a prudent move right now. And basically every group has agreed to some concessions to try to help make this budget work. And I want to acknowledge that because these have been difficult times and difficult conversations, but to echo something that I think Gardner said earlier in the meeting, we have good employees and they get it and they want to be part of the solution. So part of the spending reduction into the proposed budget has to do with concessions that all of the groups have stepped up and at least tentatively agreed to at this point. And we're also we're reducing some capital expenditures where we can. We're trying to make sure we're not cutting at capital expenditures that are going to cost us more later when something breaks or when a truck fails or a pipe bursts. But we're going back through all the assumptions we made on the capital front. We have a hiring freeze in place, so those positions that are vacant right now are currently frozen. A number of them we're going to have to refill because they're critical, essential. We have public safety positions and the like, but we've paused that because we're trying to position ourselves looking into next year's budget to be ready for what may come. And part of the healthcare plan redesign was resolving a budget shortfall that we had been chasing for a couple of cycles at annual town meeting, and we've had to walk that back a little bit as well. So we've been able to identify reductions to match the revenue loss without eroding any of our core services. But I think the concern moving forward, especially into the fall, as once we're 6 months into this new normal, to see if things worsen, is that the next round of reductions are going to be harder to make if we have to take those steps. But at a very high level, that's what has changed since March, and we can get into greater detail next week. And I'd be happy to take preliminary questions that anybody has at this point. One of the questions the chair and I discussed earlier, and I should clarify. So the documents that I sent you guys on Friday, the cover memo explains the changes. The first budget message goes into great detail about what we're hoping to do, and the tables that accompanied those, so the revenue and expenditure detail and the budget summary, are revised. So if you were to compare these to what's on the website, you would see the areas where the changes have already been made. And we'll redistribute those to you along with the line item budgets prior to our meeting on the 20th. So you'll have the departmental budgets. It won't look the same as in years past. We may not have the supplemental sections for you, but we'll get the full budgets out, including an Excel version of that prior to our hearing on the 20th.
Thank you, Steve. I will start with questions from Gardner.
Let me unmute him.
Yep. You can't.
Sorry about that. I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. David?
Thank you, Dan. I have no questions. Very, very
Thank you.
helpful presentation.
Very good. Thank you. Diane?
I'll wait for the 14th. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Bill?
I have no questions. Thank you very much. Good job, Steve.
Bill, I muted you prematurely. I'm sorry about that.
I unmuted myself ahead of time.
I know, but I think I cut you off in the
All
middle,
right.
and I want to apologize.
All right, thank you, Steve, for the update. Cautiously optimistic, I think, is a word to use. I'm sure you'll be doing some process planning and scenario planning about what the future looks like, because you don't know right now. So hopefully this works out fine for us.
Thank you.
Okay, number 8, the board will consider closing the 2020 annual town meeting warrant at noon on Friday, May 15th, 2020. Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's pretty self-explanatory. Each year in advance of the town meeting, the board needs to vote to close the warrant. We've set that date, or we're recommending that date be Friday, May 15th at noon. We've had one citizen reach out to the town clerk to request that a blank citizen's petition be emailed so that signatures can be collected. As a reminder for anybody watching, there is a process by which citizens can add something to the warrant for an annual town meeting. It requires that the language of the article, which is really an agenda item, but it's called an article, be submitted in writing, and that signatures, 10 signatures at an annual town meeting be collected beneath that article and turned in prior to the closing of the warrant. So in this case, it is likely that the public building will still be closed on May 15th. We do have a night drop box off of the clerk's office. So if there is a citizen out there who wishes to file a citizen's petition for consideration on the warrant, you would simply email the town clerk. I'm going to give Joe a heart attack and give his email out on the phone call right now, but jcollins@danversma.gov, or his assistant town clerk, Kathy Ellsworth, and her email is cellsworth@danversma.gov. They'd be happy to provide you the materials. The request we make every year is that if anybody has a citizen's petition that they are considering, it is in your best interest and the town meeting's best interest for you to reach out to us ahead of time. We have made the town attorney available to residents, not for legal advice, but if there is a question that they would like to put before the town meeting, it would go through the town manager's office, but we can have council review that to make sure that it would actually be something that could be passed and be enforceable by town meeting. So that is it in a nutshell. We're recommending that the warrant for the spring 2020 annual town meeting be closed next Friday at noon.
Thank you, Steve. So can I have a motion to close the warrant?
Diane, so moved.
Thank you. So second?
Second.
I didn't hear that. Mills, thank you. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? None, thank you. That's done, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, before we move off of that item, had I looked on, I would have seen that I had 2 notes that I wanted to mention on that one. But there were 2 articles that were in the planning process for this town meeting prior to the COVID crisis. The first was zoning consideration to change where animal husbandry is permitted in town. I asked Attorney DeLuca to reach out to the attorney representing the family that put this process in motion, and both attorneys and with the blessing of the family agreed that they would delay that until the fall. This is an item that was likely to generate considerable interest among town meeting members, and trying to give a process like that its due under these circumstances seemed difficult, and both parties agreed. So that's been pushed out to the fall. The other item that we had been discussing was the project to look at renovating the hay barn. That also, our recommendation is that not be on the warrant. That is a project that would have been, I think, 6 months ago, it made a lot of sense. We had the opportunity to use $1 million grant from the state, along with $2 million in local debt service, some of which would be offset by revenue, to really transform that facility into a historically appropriate meeting venue. But at this point, recommending that the town meeting consider, Dan and I are playing a game of mute unmute. For those at home, you can't see, but we're having a lot of fun. This is a project that would require $2 million in discretionary debt, and it would rely on revenue to start coming in next year for community gatherings. And at this point in time, it just doesn't seem to be something that makes a lot of fiscal sense. So those were likely to be the 2 articles that were going to generate considerable discussion. And so neither of those at this point, with your blessing, of course, are proposed to move forward onto the warrant, which would ultimately result in a pretty straightforward warrant where we'd be focusing on, on the budget side, it would be a level service budget, and on the warrant side, it would be looking at those, capital projects and capital expenditures that we need to make to keep the streets safe, keep the pipes from bursting, and keep the wheels turning. So I just wanted to mention that before we moved off of that item.
Dan, can I just say, please?
Yes, go ahead, Diane.
Yeah, so that was what I was really going to wait till May 14th, but as the person who was assigned to that committee, that would have been something that I would have said would have definitely come off. The work's been done. It's not going away, but I really believe that that is something that should come off for this year. Nothing's going to change, and it can come back later, but I'm glad to see that is one of the things, and sticking to public safety is definitely should be our priority. So thank you for doing that, Steve.
Thanks, Diane. So Steve, the $1 million from the state, did they take it back? Do we have it in the bank?
So I'm going to mute you again, Dan. No offense.
Am I breathing?
I can hear everything going back and forth. So I had a phone call yesterday with an undersecretary from VHCD to update him on the status of the project. And I had explained everything to him that I just explained to you. He agrees that makes perfect sense. So he asked us to circle back with him in a month or so to kind of revisit. We may need to, there may be a few options available to us. We will do what we can to preserve that funding. It's a sizable grant. We don't come across grants that size very often. So we're considering all options, and so yes, we're looking at ways to, it's not a given, but I think they are very sympathetic to a project like this being awfully difficult to move forward with during this current circumstances.
Thank you. Oh, at this time, we'll go on to number 9. The board will hear an update from the town clerk on the June 2nd, 2020 local election. Mr. Collins?
Good evening.
Good evening. Welcome.
Thank you. Kathy and Ellsworth and I are putting together a press release notice for the town election, and we hope to issue that within the next day or so, and it will contain the following date, time, place of the town election, how to apply for an early ballot, an application that can be downloaded, instructions on how to return the early ballot, and also indications that we will be looking for some poll checkers, the tally-in clerks that we use on the election. We plan on using fewer of them this time around. And right now, what we look at is poll workers generally would be considered, and they're very loyal and very faithful, but the vast majority of them are in the high-risk category, and we would not want to burden them with the thought of having to show up and maintain their positions as poll workers for this town election. And we're basically prepared, Kathy and I are prepared to send out a letter to them indicating our concerns and tell them that we would look forward to reuniting with them in September at the state primary and in November in the presidential election. As you know, the polls are usually open from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. We are suggesting giving the stay-at-home decree consideration, and a consideration be made for reducing the town election hours from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. because we expect a large number of early voting requests. A reduction in hours would also cut down on the amount of time election day support staff will be away from home. We're working closely with Mark Carleo and the Board of Health relative to maintaining a safe environment and certainly maintaining social distancing. With that in mind, we will not have the election in the Vi Gym. We plan on having it in the Danvers High Fieldhouse to allow us added space to help maintain social distancing. That's what I have for now. Kathy is listening in at this meeting, and between the two of us, and certainly the town manager, we would be able to answer any and all questions that you have regarding this notice. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Just to clarify, you can request or download a ballot for early voting
An early voting application.
application, and
A ballot has to be mailed to the voter.
okay, and what does the voter do?
The voter, once an application is successfully filed with us, and it must contain their signature, we will in turn send the ballot package with instructions to the voter. The voter votes and then can either return the ballot to us in one of two ways: mail it back to us, or drop it in the night drop box on the Sylvan Street side of Town Hall.
So they don't have to come into the polling place to vote?
They do not have to go to the polling place to vote.
Okay. And absentee ballots are still the same scenario as
Absentee
past?
ballots are the same. It's a little bit different as far as an absentee ballot is concerned, but primarily in this election, we're looking for a heavy use of early voting rather than absentee ballot.
And on election day, they can't, it's confusing to me. On election day, they have to come in person.
On
They
election-
haven't voted.
On
They haven't
election day,
voted.
they have to come in person. And if they have already returned an early voting ballot, they're not allowed to recast the ballot on election day.
Okay, thank you. Board members, any questions for the town clerk? Bill? You're live, Bill.
We're playing mute games, yeah. I have no questions, but I want to commend Mr. Collins on this, which may be his final election he's going to go out in a great style with this adapted election he's created.
Thank you.
David?
Thank you, Dan. Joe, what is the last date that a citizen can vote using this vote by mail method? How close to the actual day of the town election?
Actually, they can apply for the early voting ballot up till noon time the day before the election. However, we have to mail the ballot to them, so the time becomes problematic. But in the many years that I've been in this position, I have seen absentee ballots being requested prior to noon time of the day before. Staff mails them out, and that person gets them the next day and is able to get them in the hands of the post office and get them back to us prior to 8 o'clock on the day of the election. It can happen. Can't guarantee it will happen, but law requires that the cutoff be noontime the day before.
Okay, thanks. And that's about as close as we could come as a practical matter to voting by mail.
It's certainly not the short answer is yes, but the practical answer would be you're leaving not that much time in advance of the close of the polls to get it handled.
Right, okay. Well,
Thank you, David.
thank you,
All set?
thank you, Joe, yes.
Gardner?
I don't have any questions. I appreciate all the hard work that Joe and his office is doing to try to keep us safe and keep us voting. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane.
All set.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you, Joe. Appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
I would request a vote of the board on the polling hours for the record, please.
So moved.
Is there a second? Okay, so that's
Second,
polling,
Diane.
yep, 10 to 8 in the field house, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed? None, thank you. Okay, Joe,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
you're welcome.
Board
Number
members.
10. Number 10, the board will discuss a recent Salem newsletter to the editor, read voting by mail. This was something that Selectman Mills asked to be put on the agenda. We got a copy of the letter that a number of mayors throughout the Commonwealth signed and sent in to the President of the Senate and Speaker of the House. David?
Thank you, Dan, and I guess this is a continuing discussion really with Joe. My concern was that citizens, especially my age, don't have to go live to the polling place for the state election. What is that state election?
September, the
September.
primary.
Yeah, the primary, and then the general election, is that what, November?
Yeah, yes.
So I don't know if it would require, first of all, I don't know if the town has any authority to determine the method of voting on the state and national elections. I suspect that that's probably the prerogative of the state. In any event, I assumed that when I looked at a letter in the paper that 23 local mayors had sent to the Senate President and Speaker DeLeo, asking that there be a vote by mail program in Massachusetts for the coming election cycle. Well, I think that that would be a very important thing. And I asked, gee, I wonder if there's anything that our board can do by way of endorsing that request, supporting it, or making our own. I don't know what, we'd have to make our own request. And I'm sorry to say, I have not been able to get word back from our delegation as to what the status is on any such legislative proposal in Boston. Initially, I was told that Speaker DeLeo was not in favor of voting by mail. And I still thought that it was very important for my age group and also important wherever this Connie virus thing is going to go, we don't know. So I just wondered if the board would take some action to endorse the concept of a vote by mail program in Massachusetts to be adopted by the state legislature.
Thank you. Any comments from Gardner?
Sorry about that. All set.
All set. Diane?
All set, thank you.
Bill?
All set, thank you.
So what I think I'd like to do is ask the board for a motion for the chairman to sign his name on behalf of the board to this letter and forward it through.
So moved.
Second,
Okay, that was Gardner and Bill?
yes.
Thank you. And I don't have to come to town hall, they have my stamp here. So, Mr.
Thank you all.
Manager will take care of that. Oh, you're welcome. It was a good question, Dave. Appreciate it. Number 11, the town manager will report to the board on various items of interest. What could be more interesting than what we've done? Thank you.
Steve, you're muted.
You guys missed my good joke, but I won't bother repeating it. I do have a few items that we haven't touched on already that I'll just update you on briefly. The first is that some of you may have heard, but I'm not sure that all the public has heard, that Representative Speliotis announced that he will not be seeking re-election this fall. I know that several local candidates have expressed interest, including a couple of town meeting members, to fill that seat, but that will be a contested local election in the fall. He called me personally to share the news, and I was surprised but also happy for him. He's had a long career. He's accomplished a great deal, and he just said it felt like the right time. So I gave him a lot of credit for recognizing that and deciding that it was time. I wanted to mention briefly a couple of things we've been working on as an emergency management team. One of which we had a meeting on Monday, a committee of staff to look at reopening. So what will the reopening look like in terms of the public buildings when the time comes? We are all keeping an eye toward Boston. The governor has indicated, May 18th is the next milestone that he's looking at in terms of extending the closure of non-essential businesses. But we know at some point we will be reopening to the public, and we want to make sure that when that time comes, we're doing it safely for both employees and for residents. So that's a conversation that we've started, and probably we'll be meeting again before the end of this week. We all have homework assignments, but we're looking at that. I also had a Zoom call with the town attorney and the staff liaisons to all of our regulatory committees at the end of last week, and then through the legislation that was passed, regulatory bodies like the Planning Board, Conservation Commission, and Zoning Board of Appeals are not obligated to conduct hearings until 45 days after the governor lifts his emergency declaration. But a lot of the applications we receive through those committees are, to a certain extent, time sensitive. And so we are trying to figure out how we can start to reopen that process ahead of the governor's lifting of his emergency measure. So I had 3 staff people and town attorney looking at that. They've come up with some ideas. Right now we're looking at a couple of different options. One would be on a platform just like this, and changing the settings such that the public could essentially participate as an audience and have the board members and staff as presenters. Another option, given the way that the conversations often unfold during these hearings, would be to use one of our larger meeting spaces, whether it be at Holton Richmond or the high school, where we can practice, have committee members up front and have the audience spread throughout. But we recognize the need to get that rolling again. And at this point, we're we're eyeing the 1st of June is when we want to be ready to reopen these regulatory processes. So more to follow on that. We'll be reaching out to the chairs. I know that the staff has already contacted most of the chairs to get their thoughts on how we can do that. But we have continued to accept applications through the planning board, and we're going to start accepting zoning applications again as well, just to get the queues going. But that we recognize that needs to happen sooner than likely when the state will have everything back to normal. So those are two areas that we're looking internally at. The other issue that's weighing heavily, particularly on Dave Mountain and the recreation staff right now, is what, if any, programming will we be ready to do this summer? A lot of families rely on that programming. The recreation program book that we prepare every year was being finalized when all this started. We've gone around and around, but we do think within the next couple of days we will likely issue that program along with a cover letter, kind of explaining where we are and what we're thinking, so that even if we can't do the programming, people will still be able to see, what may be offered at some point, depending on how this plays out. But I think that's the recreation programming and the senior center are the two service areas where this is hitting really hard, because there's not a lot we can do for the seniors either when they're not in the building attending programming. And I think the last thing I would ask, if Rodney wants to unmute, we did include the third quarter revenue and expenditure report that we submit to the board every year. We do Q2, Q3, and Q4. So the Q3 would have ended in April. And Rodney, if you want to come onto the call and give the board a brief update on that.
Sure, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'll keep it brief, but if there are questions, please let me know. So in front of you, you have the quarter 3 update on the revenue and expenditure for the general fund. On the revenue side, it's as of April 1st. So again, before some of the stuff that we've been talking about throughout the meeting occurred. So it was pretty much business as usual for these numbers, as to be expected. As we head into the fourth quarter, the ones that will probably keep me up at night will be motor vehicle excise, and then seeing how we close out with hotel, motels, and meals when we get our final payments from the state in June. Other than that, the only one that's sort of new is the cannabis impact fee. That's $50,000 from Sanctuary. And again, other than that, it's pretty much business as usual. Investment income, as we've seen the past few years, has been greatly exceeding our estimate. I don't think that'll be the case for the second half of 20 and into the first half of FY21. But for this year, at least, more than doubled our estimate, which is good news. On the expenditure side, a little bit more recent through April 21st. A couple things to point out. Fire overtime looks like it'll be in excess of our estimate of the appropriation. Worst case scenario is $130,000. We're hoping it comes in under that. There's some surplus in fire, salary and wages permanent, and a couple other line items. In addition, the police have a sizable surplus at this point that could rectify that overage as well. On the good side, as far as expenditures, didn't snow too much this year, so we're looking at roughly a $400,000 surplus in our snow and ice line items, which would be a good turn back as well. The other surplus worth pointing out, as the manager mentioned earlier, was the Smith School. The timing of our bond sale and how we had a budget for it this year is going to create a surplus of roughly $700,000 or $800,000. The bulk of that, as we've talked about, may end up going to the school department to erase their sped overage that popped up mid-year. But there still should be some surplus available to turn back and help offset what may be some revenue shortfalls that we discussed a little bit earlier. Other than that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Rodney. Diane, any questions?
So Rodney, somewhere in here, I saw that we're expecting the excise tax to go down because of the COVID. Is that correct? Did I read that right?
Yes, so for FY20, there's the concern that we're waiving penalty and interest through June 29th. We urge people to pay by June 30th so they don't get hit with retroactively the penalty and interest. But we could see some slight drop in FY20, and then FY21, we've revised down our estimate at this point based on what we saw in the Great Recession, which is a drop. Motor vehicle isn't as concerning as obviously hotel motels and meals, which are essentially limited, if not fully shut down at this point. But there would be some drop off just with people maybe not buying that new vehicle or going an extra year with their used car. But we're looking at maybe a 10% drop in FY21.
Okay, so I just didn't realize that you were looking at, because of purchase of vehicle, and of course, we get, if they lease in Danvers, we get the excise tax, so that's another factor. So it's not because people aren't gonna pay, it's because of the sale of vehicles per se, where the estimate's coming from.
Yeah, we
Just
may
wanted
see
to-
some delayed payments in FY20, but no, I think more of our concern is FY21. And again, that just being that people are going to, ride out their used car for another year as opposed to trading it in for something newer.
Okay, great, thank you.
David, questions for Rodney?
No, just one, Rodney. As far as the unsold new automobiles on the ground at dealerships, does the town get any revenue for that personal property on the ground?
That would defer to Joe Collins, but I don't believe we get any personal property tax, and they wouldn't be licensed. They wouldn't have plates on them, so we wouldn't get excise tax either on those.
Okay, nothing else. Thank you, Rodney.
I
Thank you.
concur.
Thank you, Joe. Gardner?
No, I have no questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bill?
No questions. Thank you, Rodney.
All right, thank you, Rodney. Thank you, Mr. Town Manager. We're going to go into new public business now. Just a reminder, somebody wants to email public comments at danversma.gov. Now's the time to do it. We do have a couple of comments. The first one is from Tim Donahue, 98 Locust Street. His question: I would like to begin by thanking all of the staff, employees, elected and appointed officials in Danvers for your hard work ensuring the safety, security, and health of Danvers residents, along with the incredibly hard work of the medical, first responders, and essential workers. Our town leadership has been quick to make decisions and implement important expectations, both in advance and in response to Governor Baker's orders. I've appreciated the live Q&A and constant updates from Mr. Bartha in this COVID section of the town website. I am not disappointed in the decision so far. However, I am uncomfortable seeing the Board of Health meeting canceled for Thursday, May 7th. At this time, with COVID causing such a high impact throughout the world, we are left with many questions, one of which is how small businesses will be allowed to transition into reopening. Most small businesses facing an impact that could become impossible from which to recover. I feel a Board of Health meeting is vitally important to hold and also be available for the public. Most small businesses facing an impact that could become impossible from which to recover. I understand there are many questions that cannot be answered. I just hope to see communications for any long-term recommendations released as soon as possible so the business and the public can invest in items like PPE and prepare for our current uncertain future. Thank you, Tim, for your concerns, good comments. I think we're all waiting for the advisory board that the governor has put together, and they're going to come out with their recommendations on May 18th. And I hopefully by that time, the town as well as other towns will be able to start reopening where possible. But I think we need to go slow. I think you'll agree with that. Thank you for your question. Next. Michelle Curley, no address. Is there any plan to move the zoning board meetings to virtual with remote participation from the community? My family and I have been waiting almost 2 months due to COVID-19. We understand the importance of canceling in-person meetings, but are hoping to have our care heard sooner than later, and was wondering about virtual possibilities. Mr. Town Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we agree. And as I mentioned before, we have the Rich Maloney, Aaron Henry, David Fields, David DeLuca, Joe Collins, and myself were on a call
last week discussing how we can do that. We recognize the need to get that process started again. So I have a draft recommendation from them in terms of a couple of different options, and I mentioned we want to coordinate with the chairs so that the committees are prepared to start that process again, because we do have a lot of applications like the Curleys that, based on timing when it was received, have now been sitting for 8 weeks, and so we agree, and we'll be issuing some communication on that front, hopefully within the next week.
Thank you. Jim, is that it? Thank you. Thank you very much for the questions. Now the board will consider the consent calendar items as they appear below. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Motion to accept.
Diane? Second by Gardner? Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Thank you. So, there's a lot of things we could be talking about, but if any selectman has anything they want to bring up at this time, before we close the meeting, I'd appreciate it. And we'll start with Bill.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to, as I've done in the past for several years, recognize long-term people who've been connected with the town who passed. And we lost one of our former selectmen, Henry, who was a long-term selectman and long-term finance committee member. David, 975, when he beat us in an election. But we've had a lot of good conversations with Joe. We really love the town, and we'll miss Joe immensely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. Diane?
I believe I've sent off, my thoughts and recommendations. I have a lot of small business experience. So I just hope that some of my thoughts are being looked at. Thank you.
Thank you. David?
Just to repeat, Dan, thank you that the leadership and the leadership team in Danvers is, from my viewpoint, doing a superb job, and I'm right across the street. Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night. Gardner?
Sorry, I too want to thank once again all the people who decided to work for the town of Danvers for all the hard work they're doing. My concern, and I think I'm sure it's shared by others, is opening up for business is a delicate timing. I support Governor Baker. I actually work for a company he used to be in charge of before he was governor, and I know how much he relies on sound medical advice from professionals, and I'm right with him that we need to have at least a steady decline of 2 weeks before we can consider opening. But we also have to remember that small businesses, or all businesses, need time to ramp up as well. So to the extent that we can give as much lead time about when the opening date will be, it'll be important, because people have to buy supplies, they have to get their employees back, they have to work through their own processes that they may not have considered before. I have no doubt that when the decision's made, it should be immediately, the town will immediately be broadcasting that to all the businesses. And I appreciate all of the communication and all the postings on our website. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a point of information. It is the selectmen's budget we're going to hear on the 14th and send to the FinCom for their review. Typically, the selectman or a selectman represents the board at those meetings. So when Steve can best tell me what the FinCom is going to do, I'll reach out to the members to see if anybody wants to participate in it, whichever way is possible. We'll look at that a little later, but thank you. Well, I do have some comments. We don't know what the future will look like when we reopen, because we have not endured a situation similar to this pandemic. There are no definite answers on what will happen when we try to return to the new normal. While wearing a mask might not guarantee your safety, it will make people you encounter and yourselves less nervous and may reduce the spread of infection. Please be patient, be willing to accept the guidance given, and I want to thank the Danvers residents for all the cooperation and help and effort so far in the last 2 months. My wife and I, every Friday, we say, it's Friday again. Where are we going to go? There's no place to go. Please stay home, stay safe, and wear the face mask. It's the best thing to do for everybody. And thank you, Danvers, and good night.
Night.